When you think about the birth of the Empire, you probably imagine Palpatine cackling in the Senate chamber or Anakin marching on the Jedi Temple. But what if I told you that the true architect of the Empire was not a Sith Lord or a senator, but a bounty hunter? And not because he wanted to be, but because of a deal that spiraled out of control. Django Fett thought he was just cashing in. Provide some DNA fighters a template, collect a paycheck and raise a son. Simple enough, right? Except that decision created the Grand Army of the Republic. Millions of soldiers born to fight, born to obey, born to one day turn on their Jedi generals. Without Jango, there is no clone army. Without the clone army, there is no empire. The more you think about it, the darker it gets. Jango's legacy is not Boba Fett, it is stormtroopers. His face becomes the face of tyranny. Every time you see a squad of clones executing Order 66, you are looking at the unintentional handiwork of one man. And the worst part is he never lived long enough to realise it. What makes this so fascinating is that Jango was not evil. He was not trying to overthrow the Republic or enslave the galaxy. He was just a mercenary who thought he was doing a job. That is what makes his story so tragic. He is proof that sometimes the biggest monsters are not the ones who set out to conquer, but the ones who accidentally build the tools for others to do it. Star Wars often hides its darkest truths in plain sight. We talk endlessly about Anakin's fall or Palpatine's schemes, but we rarely talk about Django Fett. And yet without him there is no Clone Wars, no Jedi Purge, no Empire. He is the overlooked spark that set the fire. In this video we are going to break down how Django Fett accidentally created the Empire, why his legacy is darker than he ever realised, and how one bounty hunter's choice changed Star Wars forever. When you think about the Empire, your first instinct is probably Palpatine, the grand puppet master pulling strings in the shadows until he seizes the galaxy with both hands. But there is another figure without whom the Empire could never have existed. And that figure is Django Fett. Not the Emperor, not Count Dooku, not even Vader. Just one bounty hunter who thought he was making a smart deal with the Kaminoans. And in doing so he set in motion the single most important military machine in galactic history. Let's back up to Attack of the Clones. When Obi-Wan investigates the mysterious planet of Kamino, he finds an army already commissioned for the Republic. 10 years in the making, perfectly bred for obedience and loyalty. And every single one of those soldiers is an unaltered copy of Django Fett. This is where things get interesting. Jango never asked how the clones would be used, and the Kaminoans never cared. To him it was just a payday and a strange kind of legacy. To Palpatine it was the key to seizing absolute power. The irony is that Jango was not even loyal to the Republic. He worked for Dooku under the alias Tyrannus and was fully aware of the separatist plot, yet he still gave his DNA to create the Grand Army of the Republic. Think about how insane that is. He built the very army that would wipe out his employers and hand victory to his enemies. If you want a definition of self-sabotage, this is it. But Jango never saw himself as a galactic player. He saw himself as a professional, doing a job. What makes Jango's involvement more tragic is that he did it for something deeply personal. Boba Fett. His one unaltered clone, his son, his heir. Jango may have thought that while his clones fought and died across the galaxy, at least one piece of him would survive as family. And yet that decision tied Boba to the very system that would later dominate the galaxy. Jango thought he was ensuring a legacy. Instead, he shackled his bloodline to the rise of tyranny. The Jedi themselves failed to question this arrangement. They marched into war with an army of men grown from the DNA of a bounty hunter they barely knew. They never once stopped to ask who had ordered the clones, or why Jango was chosen. This is where Jango's fingerprints are all over the creation of the Empire. The Jedi adopted his legacy wholesale and built their entire defense around it. When Order 66 came, it was not Palpatine's lightning or Dooku's schemes that destroyed them. It was Jango's army. And let's not forget Jango's death. Cut down by Mace Windu at the Battle of Geonosis, his story ends before the war even begins. But his clones carry on without him. He never sees the Republic fall, but he is the one who planted the seed. In a sense, he becomes the most important character to die in the prequels because his DNA outlives every Jedi Council member, every senator, every separatist leader. His legacy is the Empire itself. This is what makes Jango such a fascinating figure. He was not evil, not ambitious, not a would-be conqueror. He was a mercenary who unknowingly created the single greatest instrument of tyranny in the galaxy. Palpatine may have designed the plan, but Jango built the army that made it possible. When you rewatch Attack of the Clones with this lens, Jango suddenly feels less like a side character and more like the quiet architect of the entire saga. He is the stone that sets off the avalanche. The tragedy is that he never lived long enough to realize what he had done. So why does this matter? Why does Django Fett's choice carry more weight than almost anything else in the prequels? Because it reveals just how fragile the galaxy was. One man selling his DNA for profit reshaped history. Palpatine did not need an army of volunteers. He did not need public support. He just needed Django Fett. And once Jango agreed, the rest was inevitable. Consider the clones themselves. They were designed for loyalty, obedience, and efficiency. But they were also designed for betrayal. Inhibitor chips buried in their brains turned them into time bombs waiting for Palpatine's signal. That means the fall of the Jedi was baked into their DNA from day one. And since that DNA came from Jango, the betrayal of the Jedi is directly tied to his bloodline. Every Jedi who fell in Order 66 fell at the hands of Django Fett. Now compare this to the separatist droid armies. Mass-produced, yes, but fragile. Uncreative. Easy to overwhelm with skilled leadership. Jango's clones were the opposite. Human creativity, mixed with tactical efficiency, made them the most dangerous force ever deployed in Star Wars. And while the droids could be shut down with a single command the clones endured, they became the stormtroopers of the Empire. They became the face of tyranny. What makes this so darkly ironic is that Jango himself was a warrior who fought against tyranny on his own homeworld of Concord Dawn. He hated oppression. He hated control. Yet by lending his body to Kamino, he created the ultimate oppressive force. The man who once resisted injustice gave rise to an army that enforced it across the galaxy. That is not just a plot twist. That is poetic tragedy. And look at how Boba Fett fits into this. He grows up in the shadow of this clone legacy. The galaxy sees him as just another copy of Jango, even though he is unaltered. He becomes a bounty hunter like his father and lives in a galaxy built by clones of himself. That is psychological horror. Imagine living in a universe where millions of soldiers look like you, but none of them are truly you. That is the legacy Jango passed down. This is why Jango's story hits harder the more you think about it. He was not just a mercenary. He was the blueprint for galactic oppression. Every time we see stormtroopers marching through the streets, we are seeing echoes of Django Fett. The face of tyranny is his face. Even Palpatine himself could not have chosen a better donor. Jango's combat skills, his discipline, his reputation, they made the clones respected and feared at the same time, and that respect gave the Jedi confidence to lead them into war. Which is the cruelest irony of all. The Jedi trusted Jango's clones more than they trusted their own instincts. So when we talk about how the Empire rose to power, it is not enough to credit Palpatine. We have to recognize Jango's role. Because without him, there is no clone army. Without the clone army, there is no Order 66. Without Order 66, there is no Empire. Django Fett accidentally created it all. The bigger question then is, what does Jango's story tell us about Star Wars as a whole? Because if you step back, his arc feels less like a bounty hunter subplot and more like a commentary on how empires are built, not through grand speeches or chosen ones, but through ordinary deals, compromises and small choices that ripple out until they become unstoppable. Think about how many times in history Star Wars mirrors this idea. Armies built not on loyalty, but on manufactured obedience. Governments toppling because of one decision in a boardroom. Leaders who do not see the consequences of the deals they make until it is too late. Jango Fett is Star Wars' version of that. A man who thought he was selling his services but ended up selling the future of the galaxy. And this makes him a more compelling character than most fans give him credit for. Jango is not a mastermind. He is not a politician. He is just a guy who took the wrong job. But sometimes the wrong job has bigger consequences than any superweapon. The Death Star may have destroyed Alderaan, but Jango Fett created the system that made the Death Star possible. You cannot build an empire without soldiers, and Jango gave the galaxy millions of them. There is also something deeply ironic about how little recognition Jango gets. Fans talk about Palpatine, Anakin, Obi-Wan, Yoda. Jango is rarely part of the conversation. Yet if you trace the chain of events, he sits at the very beginning. He is the quiet catalyst, the spark that ignited the war, and the reason Palpatine's plan succeeded. Star Wars often hides its biggest truths in plain sight, and Jango is one of them. Even the moral framing of his story is fascinating. Was Jango evil? No. Was he selfish? Yes. Was he complicit in something far greater than himself? Absolutely. And that complexity makes him more realistic than many larger-than-life Star Wars characters. He is not a villain or a hero. He is a flawed man whose legacy became monstrous. The Kaminoans too play a role in this tragedy. To them, Jango was nothing but a template. They did not care about his life, his values, his morality. They just needed his DNA. That depersonalization mirrors what the Republic later does to the clones themselves. Jango is commodified and then forgotten. His individuality erased in the service of a machine much bigger than him. And that is the real lesson of Django Fett's story. Tyranny does not just come from evil masterminds. It comes from ordinary people, making choices without realizing how those choices will be used. Jango is every mercenary, every contractor, every soldier who thought they were just doing a job, but ended up building something much darker. So when we say Django Fett accidentally created the Empire, we are not exaggerating. We are acknowledging the uncomfortable truth that one man's decision can change the fate of an entire galaxy. And in Jango's case, it did.
Thank you for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that share button. My main channel is Critical Analysis Hub, where I post Star Wars content about the movies. My secondary channel is Critical Analysis Hub Plus, where I focus on the shows of Star Wars. And my third channel is Critical Analysis Hub XP, where I post comic books. Be sure to take a moment and check them out. Thanks, and may the Force be with you.